The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as Daniel adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his sleek black SUV. His son, Ethan, sat in the passenger seat, his wheelchair folded neatly in the back. At 17, Ethan was a bright spark, his eyes full of dreams despite the accident that had taken his mobility 3 years ago. Daniel, a tech mogul whose fortune had grown faster than his ability to spend it, glanced at his son, whose nervous grin betrayed both excitement and trepidation. Tonight was no ordinary night. It was Ethan's first blind date, an event Daniel had orchestrated with meticulous care, though he'd never admit how much it meant to him. The idea had come from Ethan himself, months ago, during one of their late-night talks in the sprawling living room of their coastal mansion. Ethan had been scrolling through social media, his fingers flying across his phone screen, when he paused, his face clouding. "Dad," he'd said, his voice soft but resolute, "I want to meet someone. Not just anyone. Someone who sees me, you know, not the chair." Daniel's heart had clenched. He'd built empires, solved problems with code and cash, but this was uncharted territory. He'd promised Ethan he'd make it happen, and now, here they were, pulling into the parking lot of a quaint seaside cafe. Copyright where 5 girls, carefully vetted through a discreet matchmaking service, waited inside. Daniel had kept the details vague, telling Ethan only that the girls were around his age, kind, and curious about meeting someone special. What Ethan didn't know was that Daniel had added a twist. He'd asked each girl to bring something small, a token of their personality, to share with Ethan. It was a test, though Daniel hated calling it that. He wanted to see who would look past the wheelchair, past the preconceptions, and connect with his son's heart. As they parked, Daniel caught Ethan smoothing his navy blazer, a custom fit that made him look every bit the confident young man he was becoming. "You ready, champ?" Daniel asked, his voice warm but tinged with his own nerves. Ethan nodded, his grin widening. "Let's do this before I overthink it." Daniel chuckled, stepping out to unfold the wheelchair. He helped Ethan transfer from the car, a routine they'd mastered but one that always carried a quiet weight. The cafe copyright test patio glowed with string lights, and the sound of waves crashing nearby mingled with soft jazz drifting from inside. Daniel pushed Ethan toward the entrance, his heart thudding. He'd faced boardrooms and hostile takeovers, but this felt bigger. This was about Ethan's happiness. Inside, the cafe copyright was cozy, with wooden tables and mismatched chairs arranged in a private corner reserved for the event. The 5 girls sat at a long table, each with a small gift in front of them: a book, a sketchpad, a tiny model rocket, a jar of seashells, and a single red rose. Daniel's eyes scanned them, noting their nervous smiles and the way they glanced at the door. They were all lovely, each in their own way, but he wasn't here to judge. That was Ethan's job. He gave his son a gentle pat on the shoulder and wheeled him to the head of the table, where a space had been cleared. "Ladies," Daniel said, his voice carrying the easy charm that had closed countless deals, "this is Ethan. He's a tech geek, a sci-fi nerd, and probably wittier than me on my best day. I'll let him take it from here." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, and Daniel stepped back, retreating to a nearby table where he could watch without hovering. Ethan, ever the charmer, flashed a smile that lit up the room. "So," he said, leaning forward, "I hear you all brought something to bribe me with. Let's see what I'm working with." The girls laughed, and one by one, they introduced themselves, offering their gifts. Mia, a bubbly girl with curly hair, slid the book across the table. "A worn copy of Dune. It's my favorite," she said. "I figured you might like epic stories too." Ethan's eyes lit up. He loved Dune. Next was Sophie, who handed over the sketchpad, her fingers smudged with charcoal. "I drew something for you," she said shyly, showing a sketch of a futuristic city. Ethan complimented her detail work, his voice genuine. Then came Leela with the model rocket, explaining her dream of working for NASA. Ethan, who'd once built a drone with his dad, geeked out over the specs. The 4th girl, Ava, presented the jar of seashells, her voice soft as she described collecting them on her family's beach trips. Each gift was thoughtful, each girl engaging in her own way. But it was the 5th girl, Claire, who caught Daniel's attention. She was quieter than the others, her blonde hair tucked behind her ears, her eyes steady as they met Ethan's. She didn't rush to speak, didn't fidget. When her turn came, she picked up the single red rose and leaned forward, placing it gently in Ethan's hand. "I didn't know what you'd like," she said, her voice clear but soft, "but I thought a flower might brighten your day. It's from my mom's garden." Ethan's fingers closed around the stem, and for a moment, his usual quick wit faltered. He looked at the rose, then at Claire, and said, "This ice-broken bar really nice." "Thank you." Daniel watched, his chest tightening. The other gifts were clever, personal, impressive even. But Claire's rose was simple, unpretentious, and somehow bold in its sincerity. She hadn't tried to dazzle Ethan with her interests or achievements. She'd offered something small but real. Daniel sipped his coffee, pretending to read the menu, but his eyes kept drifting to Ethan, who was now joking with the group, the rose tucked into his blazer pocket. The conversation flowed easily. Amia debating sci-fi with Ethan, Leela geeking out over tech, Sophie sketching on a napkin. But Daniel noticed Ethan's gaze flicking to Claire, who listened more than she spoke, her smile warm but reserved. As the evening unfolded, Daniel saw Ethan come alive. He shared stories of coding his first app at 13, of the time he and Daniel stayed up all night watching Star Wars marathons. The girls hung on his words, laughing at his quips, asking questions that showed they were listening. But Daniel couldn't shake the image of Claire's rose. It wasn't just the gesture, it was the way she'd looked at Ethan, not with pity or curiosity, but with something like recognition, like she saw the boy behind the chair, the one who dreamed of building a that could change the world. The Cafe Tilde Copyright's owner, a jovial man named Marco, brought out dessert, chocolate tarts and lemon sorbetta, and the group dug in, the mood lightening further. Ethan, ever the strategist, suggested a game. Each girl had to pitch a wild invention, and he'd pick the winner. Mia proposed a time travel app, Sophie a robot artist, Leela a self-repairing spaceship. Ava's idea was a virtual reality beach for people who couldn't travel. Claire, last to go, hesitated, then said, a device that translates emotions into colors, so you can see how someone's feeling without them saying a word. Ethan tilted his head, intrigued. "That's deep," he said. "What color am I right now?" Claire studied him, her lips quirking. "Blue, bright blue, like you're full of ideas." Ethan laughed, and Daniel caught the spark in his son's eyes. As the night wound down, Daniel knew Ethan needed a moment to process. He suggested a break, and the girls stepped outside to the patio, chatting under the string lights. Daniel wheeled Ethan to a quiet corner by the window, where the sea glittered under the moon. "So," Daniel said, keeping his tone light, "what's the verdict? Tough crowd to impress, huh?" Ethan chuckled, his fingers brushing the rose in his pocket. "They're all awesome, Dad." "Like, genuinely?" Boot to broken bar, he trailed off, his gaze drifting to the patio where Claire stood, her silhouette soft against the lights. "She's different, that Rosia. It's not just a flower, it's like she gets it." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. He'd hoped for this, for someone to see Ethan the way he did, not as a challenge to overcome, but as a kid with a universe inside him. "You want to talk to her alone?" he asked. Ethan's eyes widened, then softened. "Yeah, just for a bit." Daniel clapped his son's shoulder and wheeled him out to the patio, signaling to the other girls that Ethan needed a moment. They nodded, understanding, and drifted back inside, leaving Ethan and Claire by the railing, the waves whispering below. Daniel watched from the doorway, his heart a mix of pride and ache. Claire leaned against the railing, her voice too soft to hear, but her smile was clear. Ethan said something, gesturing animatedly, and Claire laughed, her hand brushing his arm. The rose, still in Ethan's pocket, caught the light, a small red beacon of possibility. Daniel turned away, giving them space, and ordered another coffee he didn't need. He'd done his part. Now, it was up to Ethana and maybe, just maybe, the girl with the flower. The patio glowed under the soft amber of string lights, the ocean's rhythmic murmur blending with the faint hum of jazz from inside the Cafe Tilde Copyright. Ethan sat by the railing, his wheelchair angled toward Claire, who leaned casually against the wooden post, her blonde hair catching the moonlight. The red rose she'd given him was tucked into his blazer pocket, its petals a quiet reminder of her gesture. Daniel, lingering just inside the doorway, sipped his coffee, its warmth doing little to ease the knot in his chest. He'd orchestrated this night for Ethan, his 17-year-old son, whose sharp wit and boundless curiosity shone brighter than the accident that had taken his mobility 3 years ago. The blind date had been a carefully planned one, with 5 girls chosen for their kindness and sparkle, but Daniel hadn't expected to feel this invested, this nervous, watching Ethan now with Claire, the one who'd brought the flower first. Ethan's voice carried a playful lilt as he spoke, his hands gesturing in that animated way Daniel knew meant he was fully engaged. So, emotions into colors, huh? Ethan said, picking up on Claire's earlier idea. What color is the ocean right now? Claire tilted her head, her eyes flicking to the dark waves beyond the patio. Silver, she said after a moment. Not quite blue, not quite gray. It's calm but to broken bar alive, you know? Ethan grinned, leaning forward slightly. Okay, that's poetic. You're not secretly a writer, are you? Claire laughed, a soft sound that seemed to ease the air between them. Nah, I just notice things. My mom says I overthink everything. Daniel watched, his grip on the coffee mug tightening. He'd seen Ethan charm rooms before, real classmates, teachers, even Daniel's business partners, but this was different. There was a vulnerability in Ethan's posture, a hopefulness Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. The other girls, Amia, Sophie, Leila, Ava, had been wonderful, each bringing a thoughtful gift that spoke to their passions, a book, a sketchpad, a model rocket, a jar of seashells. But Claire's rose, simple and unassuming, had struck a chord. It wasn't just the flower, it was the way she'd handed it to Ethan, her eyes meeting his without hesitation, without the flicker of pity Daniel had grown used to spotting in others. Claire shifted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. So, what's your deal, Ethan? I mean, you're clearly into tech, but what's the big dream? Ethan's smile faltered for a split second, and Daniel's heart skipped. He knew that look at Ethan weighing whether to share the real stuff or keep it light. Big dream, Ethan said, his voice steady but softer now. I want to build AI that helps people like me, not just wheelchairs or prosthetics, but to broken bar systems that learn how you think, how you move, and make life easier, maybe even make it fun. Claire's eyes widened, not with surprise but with genuine interest. That's huge, she said. Like, changing the world huge. You already working on it? Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Kinda. Me and Dad mess around with code sometimes. I built an app last year that maps accessible routes in cities. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's more than a start, that's a broken bar reel. She paused, then added, my little brother has autism. I've always wanted to find ways to help him navigate the world better. Maybe we're not so different, you and me. Ethan's grin returned, brighter this time. Maybe not. Daniel turned away, pretending to check his phone, but his eyes stung. He'd spent years shielding Ethan from a world that could be cruel, pouring his fortune into therapies, custom wheelchairs, and every opportunity to keep his son's spirit unbroken. But this moment of connection was something money couldn't buy. He glanced at the other girls inside, chatting over dessert, their laughter warm and genuine. They'd all been kind, engaging, each bringing something unique to the table. Mia's sharp humor, Sophie's quiet creativity, Leila's bold ambition, Ava's gentle warmth. They'd all seen Ethan, really seen him. But Claire had reached him first, not with flash but with a quiet gesture that felt like a promise. The night air grew cooler, and Daniel caught Ethan's eye, a subtle check-in. Ethan gave a small nod, his signal that he was good, better than good. Daniel stepped outside, keeping his distance but close enough to hear if Ethan needed him. You want to see something cool? Ethan asked Claire, pulling out his phone. He tapped the screen, and a small drone, no bigger than a coffee mug, whirred to life from a bag by his chair. It hovered, its tiny lights blinking red and blue. Claire's jaw dropped. You built that? She asked, laughing as the drone did a lazy loop above them. Me and Dad, Ethan said, his voice proud but not boastful. It's got a camera that can read hand signals. Watch. He made a quick gesture, and the drone dipped, then spun, landing neatly back in the bag. Claire clapped, her laugh bright. Okay, that's officially awesome. You're like a tech wizard. Ethan shrugged, but his eyes sparkled. Just a guy with too much time on his hands. Claire shook her head. Don't do that. Don't downplay it. You're building stuff most people only dream about. Ethan looked at her, his usual quick comeback absent. For a moment, they just sat there, the drone's hum fading, the waves filling the silence. Daniel felt like an intruder, witnessing something private, something new. Inside, the other girls were wrapping up, gathering their things. Daniel caught Mia's eye, and she gave him a thumbs up, her smile genuine. They'd all had fun, and none seemed stung by Ethan's focus on Claire. Daniel had made sure the evening was framed as a group meetup, not a competition, but he knew they could sense the shift. He stepped back inside, giving Ethan and Claire more time, and chatted with Marco, the Cafe Tilde copyright owner, about the dessert spread. Good kid you got there, Marco said, nodding toward the patio. Got a spark? Daniel smiled, his chest swelling. Yeah, he's the best thing I've ever built. Back on the patio, Claire was telling Ethan about her mom's garden, how she'd spent hours as a kid digging in the dirt, planting roses because they were tough but beautiful. Ethan listened, his usual banter replaced by a quiet intensity. You really love that garden, huh? He said. Claire nodded. It's where I go when I need to think, or when the world's too loud. Ethan tilted his head. I get that. For me, it's coding. Everything else just a broken bar falls away. Claire smiled, her fingers brushing the railing. Maybe you can show me sometime. Not the coding part, I'd probably crash your computer, but the drone stuff, or your app. Ethan's laugh was loud, unguarded. Deal. But only if you show me that garden. I want to see where this rose came from. He tapped the flower in his pocket, and Claire's cheeks flushed, just slightly. Daniel, catching the tail end of their exchange, felt a pang of something he couldn't name. A pride, relief, maybe a touch of envy for the simplicity of their connection. He'd spent years solving problems with money and logic, but Ethan was navigating this on his own, with a courage Daniel admired more than any boardroom victory. As the night drew to a close, Daniel approached, his steps deliberately slow. Hate to break this up, champ, but we've got an early morning tomorrow. Ethan groaned, but his smile didn't fade. Yeah, Dad, always the buzzkill? Claire laughed, then turned to Ethan. Can I text you, to make sure you don't crash the drone? Ethan's grin was electric. You better. I'm counting on it. They exchanged numbers, and Claire stood, her movements unhurried, like she didn't want the moment to end. She gave Ethan a small wave, then headed inside to join the others. Daniel wheeled Ethan back to the SUV, the rose still vibrant in his son's pocket. The other girls said their goodbyes, each offering Ethan a warm smile or a playful jab about his drone skills. Mia promised to send him a sci-fi reading list, Sophie slipped him a quick sketch of the drone, Leela vowed to challenge him to a rocket-building contest, and Ava pressed a tiny seashell into his hand. But it was Claire's rose that Ethan held on to, his fingers brushing its petals as Daniel helped him into the car. As they drove home, the coastal road stretching dark and quiet before them, Ethan was silent for a long time. Daniel didn't push, just let the hum of the engine fill the space. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low but steady. Thanks, Dad, for tonight, for a broken bar, all of it. Daniel glanced at him, catching the glint of the dashboard lights in Ethan's eyes. You did the hard part, kid. I just booked the table. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. Nah, you made it happen. And a broken bar. I think I want to see her again. Claire, I mean. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. I figured. She's got good taste in flowers. Ethan smirked, then leaned back, the rose still in his hand. As the car wound through the night, Daniel felt a weight lift, replaced by a quiet hope. Ethan wasn't just his son, he was a young man carving his own path, one rouse, one connection, one brave step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he'd done something right. Not as a millionaire, but as a dad. The coastal road stretched dark and quiet as Daniel drove, the SUV's headlights cutting through the night. Ethan sat beside him, the red rose from Claire still tucked into his blazer pocket, its petals catching the faint glow of the dashboard. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that comes after a night that changes things. Daniel glanced at his son, whose face held a mix of contentment and something new. Hope, maybe. or the spark of possibility. The blind date at the Seaside Cafe / copyright had been a leap, a carefully orchestrated evening where 5 girls had met Ethan, each bringing a gift to share a piece of themselves. Mia's book, Sophie's sketchpad, Leila's model rocket, Ava's seashells, all thoughtful, all meaningful. But Claire's rose, simple and sincere, had struck a chord, and Ethan's quiet focus on it now told Daniel everything he needed to know. Back at their sprawling coastal mansion, Daniel helped Ethan transfer from the car to his wheelchair, a routine they'd perfected but one that always carried a quiet weight. Inside, the house was warm, the hum of the smart home system adjusting lights as they entered. Ethan wheeled to the living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the ocean beyond. He pulled the rose from his pocket, twirling it between his fingers. "Dad," he said, his voice soft but steady, "tonight felt a broken bar real. Like I wasn't just the kid in the chair." Daniel's chest tightened. He'd spent years building a tech empire, solving problems with code and cash, but Ethan's happiness was a puzzle he couldn't program. "You're never just that kid," Daniel said, sitting across from him. "You're Ethan, the guy who built a drone at 15. Who's got bigger dreams than I ever did." Ethan grinned, but his eyes stayed on the rose. "Clary broken bar." She didn't look at me like I was a project. She just a broken bar saw me. "Does that make sense?" Daniel nodded, his throat tight. He'd seen it too with the way Claire's steady gaze had met Ethan's, free of pity or hesitation. Her rose wasn't a grand gesture, but it was honest, and Ethan had felt it. "It makes perfect sense," Daniel said. "You thinking of texting her?" Ethan's grin turned sheepish. "Already did, just to say thanks," she replied with a picture of her mom's garden. He held up his phone, showing a photo of rose bushes under sunlight, vibrant and alive. Daniel smiled. "Looks like a place worth visiting." The next morning, Ethan was up early, his laptop open on the dining table, coding with a focus Daniel recognized as his son's way of processing big emotions. Daniel brewed coffee, watching Ethan's fingers fly across the keyboard. "Working on the app?" he asked, referring to Ethan's Accessible Roots project. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, boot to broken bar. I had an idea." Claire mentioned her brother, how he struggles with navigating crowded places. "I'm tweaking the app to include sensory-friendly paths, less noise, fewer people." Daniel raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That's big, champ. You tell her yet?" Ethan shook his head, a shy smile creeping in. "Not yet, want it to work first." Over the next week, Ethan and Claire texted daily. She sent him bad puns about flowers. He sent her drone videos, including one that accidentally crashed into a bush, which made her laugh in a voice message that Ethan replayed twice. Daniel watched his son light up, the rose now in a small vase by his desk, a quiet reminder of that night. When Claire invited Ethan to her mom's garden, Daniel drove him, staying in the car to give them space. Through the window, he saw Ethan wheel along the garden path, Claire pointing out roses, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Ethan's face was alive, his gestures animated as he explained something, probably tech. Knowing him,